All right, we're live. All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order now. I'd like to thank you all for coming to the Desert Regional Health Care Alliance Nursing Committee. We called this meeting to discuss some concerns from administration. I'd like to introduce our committee members. We got Ricardo. Thank you for attending, Ricardo.
Hello.
We have Sandra. Hello, Sandra.
Hello.
And Sherry.
Hello.
And with myself, I'm Laura. And we need to discuss some issues that we are having. There's an open issue of concern. We have many CHF readmissions. Now, it has been suggested by administration that we start a program that would monitor blood pressure, weights, and weight and heart rates to decrease readmissions. Now, the administration is thinking that possibly that the patients are being readmitted because they need help in home monitoring. Now, as a committee, we've been asked by the hospital to collect some hospital data about these readmitted patients. Now, there's a couple of things that administration have asked us to do. Administration has asked us to look into the availability of caregivers in the home of these patients and the financial ability for these people that don't have caregivers to hire their own caregivers. Administration is also encouraging these patients that don't have caregivers to have a nanochip attached to their wrist to monitor blood pressure and pulse. Now, this data would go back into the cardiac unit, and that's who would monitor this information for them. Thirdly, administration wants to monitor these readmission patients that don't have caregivers and to intervene prior to their exacerbation of heart failure. Now, as a nursing committee, we are looking at the ethical and other implications this could have on our patients at DRHA. I have asked each one of you to provide some answers and research some of our concerns, and we came up with these concerns at our last meeting. Sherry, our first concern is what are the ethical issues that we as a nursing committee will have to address?
Okay, so first of all, I just want to review what ethics is. I read an article by Roy Simpson, and in his article on ethics and information technology, noted that ethics gives us guidelines in regards to our behavior and beliefs. And now with the information going computer, we're still needing to be mindful of patient advocacy and preventing disclosure of information. And of course, with computers, we also need to pay attention to gathering information on a need-to-know basis. You know, before the computer information technology came around, we had to just be concerned more about breaching confidentiality, and now it's with the computer we have to be more mindful of not looking further into what we have accessible to us with the data that's available. So it's changed a little bit with ethics. So first of all, I kind of wanted just to go over what we're really looking at with regards to ethics. And then I wanted to kind of go over the situation again. So administration has suspected that patients need more help being monitored at home. They've requested us to obtain information from the patient's medical records that have been diagnosed with CHF and do have readmissions. The purpose of it is because they don't have a caregiver, and they want us to assess their caregiving situation, and they have frequent readmissions to the hospital, and they also want to know if the patients have financial ability to hire caregivers. So the plan was, of course, to ask the nursing committee to obtain medical records on readmission status based on whether they have a caregiver and their financial ability of whether or not they can afford one. The ethical issues that they will have to address is, have they obtained consent from the patients? Do they have the right to seek information regarding patients' caregiving situation? And do they have the right to seek financial information? Based on the information given, we also question the purpose of this project, or this, committee identification of medical records for the monitoring of patients at home. And is it because the hospital wants to save money on the cost of readmissions, or do they want to save money on being penalized for frequent readmissions, which is what is a huge issue with hospitals, and that is an issue, and I see that the intention is good for the administration, that they want to prevent, improve patient outcomes and prevent the exacerbation of heart failure by monitoring these patients at home. But what is more important, so we would need to address what is most important. What's the priority of the administration? Is it for the benefit of the patients, or is it to improve patient outcomes? So again, at home, if they don't have a caregiver and we were to set up a nanochip and there was no caregiver at home, what would happen if they did have abnormal vital signs? Would there be anyone there to be able to answer the phone if the patient's in a situation where they wouldn't be able to answer it? What would be the plan then? So that's something to think about. According to the same author, Simpson, on the article's Ethics and Information Technology in 2006, they questioned what information should we have the capability to have access to. This author explains that in the American Nurses Association Code of Ethics, there is a basic social contract, and this means that the patient is giving the medical profession information regarding, and it's called informed consent, to obtain treatment from the hospital, and in return the hospital is expected to only use the patient information for that specific purpose. So, in this situation, they do have good intentions of seeking to monitor the exacerbation of prevention of heart failure, but at the same time, they're also looking at the readmission rate, and they're asking the committee to look at the medical records to find out whether or not they have a caregiver and their financial ability to hire one. So that, I think, might be an issue that would need to be addressed. According to the article Peterson, DeMuro, Goodman, and Kaplan, in the case of Sorrell versus IMS Health in 2013 on the issues and opportunities for informaticians in the Journal of American Medical Informatics Association, they note that patients need to trust the medical professionals who provide care to them, or they may in the future be hesitant or even decline giving information when it may be needed. So that's something that needs to be considered if we neglected to obtain informed consent. Would this decrease the trust in the public or the patient's eye that we did not do that? Instead, we just went through their medical records and found out all this information, and then come up to them and say, we realize that you have these issues and we'd like to monitor you, and we realize we found out that you don't have a caregiver and you have frequent readmissions. If somebody came up to me and said that, I probably would wonder where they got that from, and then it might cause some mistrust with trusting people with important medical personal information. Something to consider. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services states that health information can be used for research, but informed consent is needed whenever patient information is used, even for research purposes. So the ethical dilemmas are, is there consent? Is this for the patient or for the hospital? And do they have the right to seek information regarding personal information such as caregiving situations or financial ability at random? So again, with the Sorrell versus IMS Health article by Peterson, DeMuro, Goodman, and Kaplan in 2013, they hypothesized that, given the patient, the purpose and the plan of such important advances in scientific, advancement and improvement for patient outcomes, most likely patients will give informed consent, as long as they're given the purpose. So I think just, the fact that everything needs to be up and up and the patient's consent needs to be obtained, then I think that more than likely the patients would agree and approve and give consent for seeking information regarding caregiver financial ability and the ability to be monitored at home. And as the latest in informaticians, they do play a significant role in making sure that advancements in science do happen. So, there's both sides of the coin. So that's pretty much what I have right now besides my recommendations, and I think that was something that we're going to discuss at the end of our meeting. So,
yes, does anybody have any concerns or any questions or any comments for Sherry?
Sherry, you raised a good point. If we were receiving that a vital sign needed some assistance, and there wasn't anybody there to help this person, if this person didn't have a caregiver, would it be our responsibility ethically to call 911 or call for help? And then also in turn, what if 911 or help wasn't provided, and would we be liable? Could the family in turn, or family members in turn, hold the hospital liable for having this information and we weren't able to save their loved one? Or I wonder if it can go that way also.
Right.
That could be a concern.
Yes.
But another thing I was wondering about is about the informed consent and putting these nanochips in. So I wonder if what about like parents putting nanochips in their children? Is it ethically right? What happens when that child turns 18? Or maybe a person putting putting the same nanochip in an adult, like an adult parent. Who can consent for these, I wonder? That could be an issue also. Is it ethically right for me to put a chip into my child where later on they might not want this, or would it be ethically right for me to put a chip into my ailing parent?
Right.
So there's so many concerns. There's the ethical issue can just branch off all over the place, I would think.
I totally agree, and I think the fact that you brought up a need-to-know basis as well, Sherry. Need-to-know basis, if you do not follow that need-to-know basis, you're actually breaching their confidentiality, and the technology isn't there to actually deny access at one point or the other. So, I mean, that's another issue with implanting any kind of device into somebody. There's no way to protect the patient as well. So that is a concern. So I'm glad you brought that up. That was a really good point as well.
Right.
And I actually, the funny thing about ethics is that it's not really a yes or no answer really ever with ethics. It's really opinion-based, and do the interests of the hospital align with the interests of the patient? And that's what we need to be sure is happening here, and that we are protecting both, because if we only consider the patient's needs and not the hospital's needs, then what purpose are we serving our facility as well? You know, we work here for a reason. So I think that they both need to align, and I think that's the purpose of this meeting. We want to be sure that that all the needs are being met for both sides, but I think it's really opinion and how we favor and how we're going to protect ourselves as a facility to best serve our patients. You know, making sure that we're covered with technology, with consents, all of that. But I think you brought up some excellent ethical questions, and those need to be further considered before we decide to move forward.
Right. Thank you.
That's so true. Thank you, Sherry. Appreciate all of your input. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next question here. Sandra,
Yes.
Are there HIPAA concerns as well with these this monitoring device?
Yes, there are some HIPAA concerns. HIPAA, as we all know, is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. In an article I read by Staggers 2018, I'm sorry, McNeil 2014, in 2013, the healthcare sector accounted for 44% of all identity theft reported in the United States. That's just the healthcare. That's a huge part. That's not retail, financial. Came up with their own percentage. So there's already we know that there's a need for this information. We know that it's out there. So is this just giving them another way to obtain this information? There's a lot of cyber hacking going on. There's more money. Research has showed that there's more money for health care insurance credentials. A cyber hacker can get $20 for healthcare information versus $1 to $2 for a U.S. credit card. So there's a demand for this. A big issue is medical information is not just one person that is going to get this. It starts with billing. It goes to the insurance company. It goes to a doctor. It goes to another doctor. It goes to this pharmacy. It goes to that pharmacy. So there are so many people that have this information. There's so many areas where it can be hacked. So it does raise a lot of HIPAA concerns. Life insurance, they will also have access to this information for I can't think of the word, when you have a condition.
Reauthorization.
Yes. So so there are a lot of areas where this information can be we can violate some get some HIPAA violations. Another area is violating is what if you don't want all your information disclosed when you go to a doctor's visit, which happens. You don't want everything. If you're going to see a doctor about one certain area, how much can you hold back? How much is going to be exposed to this other doctor or to the staff? So that's all I have as far as HIPAA violations.
That's good. Thank you, Sandra. Does anybody have any questions for Sandra? Go ahead, Ricardo. Go ahead.
I wonder if it would be worth the time and to research the kind of IT protection firewalls that were used with that rate that you give us, the 44% identity theft rate. I mean, that's huge. That's almost half of the patients. That makes me concerned for my own. So I wonder if there's if the firewalls were not as efficient back then, what was the data on that again from that data?
That was from 2013, is that correct?
Yes, the healthcare sector accounted for 44% of all identity theft in the United States.
That's significant.
It is.
Yes. In the article of Staggers 2008, the FDA is analyzing benefits and risks of medical devices that utilize nanotechnology to determine a plan for better regulations.
Well, that's
right now you wonder if it's easier to hack into a computer that requires passwords, or if it would be easier to develop a scanner that could steal the information right off of a person's wrist. I mean, it seems like it'd be out there for people to do that, you know?
It's
Um,
not that far-fetched of an idea with
right.
the way things are hacked nowadays or the way things are obtained. That it doesn't sound like such a far-fetched idea of being able to get that. It seems like it might even be a little more accessible.
Yeah.
I think
That
it's
is
good
very
that
alarming.
I think it's good that we're taking into consideration all the possibilities of this and not just looking at one area. And that's true, Ricardo. You not only can you take it off of your medical record, but you can also take it off of someone's body by easily being able to scan near it. I mean, they do it with credit card all the time. I was also really shocked with these numbers. It's crazy. And I'm kind of wondering if the meaningful use has helped this at all, because part of their recommendations is to increase the IT, the HIPAA part of the medical records as well. They really are trying to protect the information that's part of stage 2. So I'm wondering if that's helped at all. Since this is 2013, it would be interesting to see what the next data would show.
Hmm. I agree.
Yeah, the article that I was speaking of regarding the Sorrel versus IMS Health, it was interesting to read that the pharmaceutical companies were using data from what the doctors are prescribing to patients for marketing purposes, and that the actual, I think it was Vermont, was the state that was okay with it. And so then I read it's interesting to see that it varies from state to state on whether this can happen, whether or
Right.
not you can take information, you just black out their names and then use that information to sell, like you were
Marketing.
saying, Sandra, and that's
Right.
pretty scary. And you said that healthcare information is worth more than just the credit card information is pretty scary. So yeah, that is something to think about.
And you also,
Yeah.
I'm also concerned with what happens with these nanochips once a person passes away. Who is going to regulate on retrieving them, or what happens to them? It seems like it's endless possibilities to ways people can obtain these chips.
Right.
It's like stolen social security numbers, things like that. I mean, somebody else could use that chip as their own.
And I'd say the information that when they get it off of a chip is more readily accessible because um, you'll have grave diggers and everything like that that do that now. I mean, imagine for priceless information such as our medical information, where it's
Well,
worth more than the credit
That's
card.
true. Pretty scary.
yes, and when you think about our health records, it's not just one part that they would have access to. It's whereas a credit card, it would be just our social security number, our financial information. But this is also giving us your medical history, access to what drugs you have. So we know there's a market for pharmaceutical drugs. So it's and financials, especially since, like you were mentioning, Sherry, that they want to be able to determine if somebody can financially afford healthcare. So you're going to have to divulge that information also. So it's a wide range of your personal information that people have access to.
Right.
Good. Thank you so much, Sandra. That was very, very informative. Appreciate that. We're moving right along to Ricardo. One of our last concern was, are there environmental issues that may influence our process or decisions in this?
You know, there actually is. There's, in fact, from the reading that I've done and the research, environmental concerns are actually surrounded a lot by or around consent as well. That was a very huge thing. So, I think it's the environment that we create and how the patients perceive healthcare and the healthcare that we're providing. I think I also cited that Sorrell versus IMS, and that the pharmaceutical company was purchasing all that data. That's the kind of when that information leaks out to the public, that creates distrust. And when the patients do not trust their healthcare providers, whether it be the entire facility, it makes it difficult to deliver healthcare. And it comes from the very top. So if the facility is doing it, the doctors will do it, the staff will do it. If that's the public perception, we will be losing business, and in that sense, we're ruining the perception of our hospital. And I think we have to keep the image in the face of the hospital respectable. So again, I think creating the environment that the patients feel comfortable in is going to be a huge factor, and it's going to be an uphill battle for us to maintain that. Other issues that I looked at were, how the public perceive technology, and there was a study done back in 2006, and Staggers, McCaskey, Breslin, and Kennedy addressed that the consumer's perception of nanotechnology revealed a general openness to the nanomaterials, but it didn't specify who was part of this, or didn't explain who was part of this study. I think from my own experience, I've spoken with several patients that from their past, they were just grown to not trust the government as much, and it seems to be the newer, younger public that is more open and open to new ideas, such as the implantable devices on the wrist for monitoring. So if we're going to be doing that to adults or to the older Americans that we're serving, I think again, I don't think this study necessarily addresses that population. So it'd be more interesting to see who this population exactly studied. So it would be good to further research that study and know the parameters such as age, social status, education, and that. So the other things that I thought could affect whether the patients would consent to putting in a device would be religion. If I know there's people that don't even like to get tattoos. So how would they feel that their bodies were being defaced by putting a microchip in their body? There's people that watch very closely what they eat, and it would be interesting to I think it would be prudent for us to do a survey of our population, of our patients rather, and see if they would be interested, how they would feel about such a device, if it would be utilized. I think going that way would be better than just trying to push it onto them, honestly. So the other things that we have to consider in gaining consent is creating the environment for education, and letting them know that we are here to support them and not to push it on them. And in doing that, it requires a lot of patience and a lot of education, letting them know exactly what the device is, what we intend to use it for, and for no other reason at all, that it actually doesn't have the other capabilities. And then, of course, we have to consider their financial status. It would be, I think, unjust for the patient, and again, we would lose their trust if we said, well, you either have to get a caregiver or we'll implant the device. I think in that situation, we would lose their trust. I think we should be able, if we're going to try and push this agenda of the microchip, it would be prudent for us to provide a healthcare worker, even if it's just for a year, to see how it takes off. And who knows, the microchip does not have eyes, and it doesn't tell us what the patient looks like. It merely gives us numbers. So I think we would be amiss to not continue to provide caregivers in that regard. Um, and that's about what I have for that.
That's really good, Ricardo. Does anybody have any questions or concerns or comments for Ricardo?
Yeah, you know, in that, I believe in that same article that you were mentioning, the Staggers, McCaskey, Kennedy, and Rosemary of 2008 on the
Yes.
nanotechnology. Um, I believe that they mentioned in there that like you were saying, about people that really are holistic in taking care of their bodies. Um, what about the metal that's placed into their bodies? Do they have allergies?
That's
Um,
true.
it's. I mean, we talk about even like the old metal cavities. The stuff we put in our mouths, and now they're trying to change that all to porcelain because of the metallic. Um, poisons that can happen, and would the hospital take that into consideration, or would that be an issue? What if some kind of infection or allergic reaction to the whatever metals that are in these situations? Would the hospital be able to handle that? And is there a
Right.
plan for that?
Right.
So that's
Well,
something that
I agree. The other situation that I failed to mention was if the information can be sold to pharmaceuticals, I wonder then if the hospitals could benefit from it, if they'd be willing to sell the information, patient information, to businesses, which could in the future affect hiring processes, because then they would know your medical history and whether they're willing to pay for your insurance or not.
exactly, yes, that was in that article. You're right. Very interesting.
So yeah.
Ricardo, I love the idea you had about bringing together a survey and bringing it to our hospital and really asking that question to the clients that we serve, to our own patients, and actually
Right.
not just to the elderly, not just to the younger generation, but to kind of close that gap and to kind of ask it across the board and see what difference that does make. I think you brought a really good point, and I really like the idea of having a survey to actually be able to find out what our patients really do think about this idea. It'd be interesting, and I think it'd behoove us to actually do that and bring that forth before administration.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
Great idea.
In that article, also the Staggers, McCaskey, Bredston, and Kennedy 2008, it does mention that people are open to this nanotechnology because we do mention that it's they do mention that it's safe, and
Right.
they take that to mean that it eliminates all risks, which again they just we need to put more education out there so so people can understand what it's safe means. Safe for what though?
Well, and I think it's the public needs to understand that safe is a relative word,
Mm-hmm.
and it's does the good outweigh the bad, really,
Mm-hmm.
is what has to be considered, because safe is relative. There's a danger with everything.
Right.
As long as they have that microchip implanted, there's always going to be the risk of infection.
Mm-hmm.
So safe is very relative, and I think that's one thing that we do have to make sure they understand.
Education.
Yes, ma'am.
That's really good. Is any other questions, concerns with Ricardo's information? If not, we're going to go ahead and move along. I'd like each of you to, starting with Sherry, to give your final recommendations to administration on your point that you brought up today. Sherry, what was your final recommendations?
Well, with the article that we've been discussing in the last few minutes, the Staggers, McCaskey, Kennedy, and Rosemary in 2008, the nanotechnology, the coming revolution, and its implications for consumers, clinicians, and informaticians really is something that we probably need to come to the realization that it's really going to happen, probably in the near future. So we really should seriously think about planning for it. So my recommendation would be to have a plan in place to, like you guys said, educate, communicate the benefits and the risks, and obtain consent. explain the purpose of it. You know, the purpose is they have good intentions of wanting to monitor for heart failure and to prevent the exacerbation, but the way they're going about doing it is the ethical dilemma. And so with the nanotechnology, actually, you know, it's going to happen, but they need to have a better plan in place on how they're going to obtain their information, and of course get consents from the patients and explain the purpose. I think that patients would be more willing to consent for, you know, advancements for their children in the future. But we just need to prepare. Desert Regional Hospital needs to prepare in order to obtain consent and be able to explain and educate the patient population. That's my recommendation.
Thank you, Sherry. Sandra,
Yes.
what is your final recommendation for administration?
It's hard to for a hospital or a clinic to focus on HIPAA violations. When this is such a broad area, it wouldn't just be for, it's not just a little hospital-wide problem. Since we know that people are out there, cyber hackers are looking for this information, I would, and the FDA working on outweighing the benefits already, I think I would recommend doing a little more research, seeing what areas, what hospitals or clinics have used this, see what issues they've had come across as far as HIPAA violations, see what's done to improve those issues, and maybe do not make it available to the whole hospital, but more maybe a trial area, a trial group. See how it goes. And then reassess in a year or so and see what violations we've come across as far as HIPAA violations.
Okay, that's really good, Sandra. That's a good recommendation. Ricardo, what are your final recommendations for administration?
I think my final recommendations, I agree. I think survey would be part of doing more research. I think investing in questionnaires and surveys for our clients first, and then it's not always best practice to be at the front part of a trial. So I think seeing how many other facilities have implemented these chips and seeing what their data is like, what their infection rate and things are, I think perhaps allowing other facilities to take the lead, sit back. Sometimes it's okay to not be at the very forefront, but to see what to learn from others' mistakes. So I think doing more research is imperative for success of this program if we really intend to launch it, because it right now may actually not be the time, and it may just mean that we have to wait for a second generation for better protection for the patient, and maybe also for better perception from the patient. Like I said, it seems to be a younger generation that's more open to these ideas, and the older generation that's not as open. So I think doing more research is imperative to continue.
I think that's great. I think as a consumer myself, I would want more data, more information. How has it worked? And follow up with people who have had these implanted and see what kind of medical issues, if any, if they've had any because of this.
Right. That's very good. Now, any final thoughts on the floor? If not, I would like to thank each one of you for all of your research on these concerns. We'll go ahead and bring this before administration, and next time we meet, we'll go ahead and discuss what administration has said about our recommendations. So at this time, I would like to conclude our meeting and adjourn, and thank each one of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.